series opens with Mary Bennet, the quietest and most misunderstood daughter in a household overflowing with opinions. Mary is intelligent, observant, and far more sensitive than anyone around her realizes. But she has spent most of her life being told that those qualities matter less than beauty, charm, and the ability to attract a wealthy husband. Her mother measures every daughter by the standards of fashionable society, and Mary is the only one who never seems to fit the picture. Jane is admired for her beauty, Elizabeth for her confidence and sharp mind, Kitty for her cheerful nature, and Lydia for her energy. Mary, by comparison, is treated like the disappointing sister who should remain in the background and avoid drawing attention to herself. Before the story moves forward, we get a clear sense of the world Mary has grown up in. In her society, marriage is not simply a romantic choice. It determines a woman's security, reputation, and future. A young woman with little money can still receive endless attention if she is beautiful enough, while a woman considered plain may be ignored no matter how intelligent or kind she is. Mary has absorbed this belief from her mother, who talks constantly about eligible bachelors, family fortunes, and the urgent need to marry off all 5 daughters. Mrs. Bennet's obsession is not completely without reason. Since the Bennet estate can only pass to a male heir, the women could lose their home after Mr. Bennet dies. Unfortunately, instead of explaining this fear with honesty and compassion, Mrs. Bennet turns it into relentless pressure and often directs her frustration at Mary. One afternoon, Mrs. Bennet rushes into the room where her daughters are gathered and announces exciting news. A wealthy young gentleman named Mr. Bingley has rented a nearby estate. To her, his arrival is not simply neighborhood gossip. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She orders the girls to look their best and insists that one of them must win his attention before another family does. Mary watches her sisters react with excitement, but she already knows her mother is not imagining her as a possible bride. That painful truth becomes even clearer when Mary later overhears Mrs. Bennet speaking to a friend. Her mother complains about Mary's red complexion, uneven skin, and lack of fashionable beauty. She says she would be satisfied if the other 4 daughters married well and only hopes Mary's presence does not damage their chances. Mary quietly walks away before anyone notices her. The words hurt so deeply that she cannot face her own reflection afterward. The next morning, Mary visits an optician because reading has become difficult. Her vision has grown blurry, and she needs glasses. This should be a simple solution, but to Mary it feels like another reason for her mother to criticize her appearance. At the shop, she meets Mr. Sparrow, a thoughtful young man learning the family trade. He patiently helps her choose the correct lenses and tells her that the glasses suit her. His compliment is sincere, but Mary cannot accept it. She has heard her mother's judgment for so long that kindness sounds unbelievable. Still, Sparrow's gentle attention affects her more than she wants to admit. On the walk home, Mary learns that a large assembly ball will be held in Meryton the following month. Such events are social battlefields where families display their daughters, young men evaluate possible brides, and every dance creates new gossip. Mary secretly wants to attend. She dreams of being invited onto the floor like her sisters, of being noticed for once, and of experiencing one evening where she is not treated as an embarrassment. Her sisters, however, barely include her in their conversation. Their relationship is not openly cruel, but they have become accustomed to seeing Mary as distant, serious, and unimportant. When Mr. Bennet discusses which daughters should attend, he unexpectedly includes Mary. Mrs. Bennet immediately objects. In her opinion, Mary's only useful role at the ball is to accompany her mother, bring refreshments, and remain out of the way while the other girls search for husbands. Mary attempts to ignore the conversation by putting on her new glasses and opening a book. Instead of leaving her alone, Mrs. Bennet attacks her again, asking why she would choose something that makes her face look even less appealing. Mary scratches her hands beneath the table and concentrates on staying silent. She has learned that defending herself usually creates a larger argument. That evening, the family maid, Hill, notices Mary's excitement about the ball. Hill offers to help choose a dress and prepare her hair. Mary admits that she is afraid no one will ask her to dance. Hill reminds her that standing beside beautiful sisters does not erase her own qualities. Mary is intelligent, loyal, and capable of understanding people more deeply than she realizes. Someone with genuine character may value those traits more than a perfect complexion. The encouragement is simple, but it is one of the first times an adult has spoken to Mary without comparing her to anyone else. A month later, the Bennet family arrives at the crowded assembly. Mary immediately sees how intense the competition is. There are far more young women than eligible men, and every mother is watching the room like a military commander. Jane and Elizabeth are quickly invited to dance. Kitty and Lydia join the excitement soon afterward. Mary remains near the wall, pretending she is comfortable while couples move across the floor. Then Mr. Sparrow approaches and politely asks for a dance. Mary is thrilled. For the first time that evening, she stops thinking about how she looks and simply enjoys herself. Sparrow asks for another dance, and Mary accepts. Their conversation is easy because he does not speak to her as though he is doing her a favor. Charlotte Lucas, a practical family friend, quietly warns Mary that accepting 3 dances from the same man can be interpreted as a serious romantic understanding. Mary does not care about the rule. She is finally having fun. Mrs. Bennet notices and immediately pulls her aside. She forbids Mary from dancing with Sparrow again because his father owns an optical shop and therefore ranks below the Bennets socially. She says that if Mary cannot attract an impressive husband, she must at least avoid harming her sister's reputations by encouraging an unsuitable man. Mary obeys. When Sparrow returns, she tells him they cannot dance again because her mother believes his family is beneath theirs. His face changes instantly. He tries to hide the humiliation, but she knows she has wounded him. On the ride home, Mary is ashamed. Sparrow treated her with genuine warmth, and she rejected him using the same cruel standards that had always hurt her. Looking into the mirror that night, she asks herself when she became so frightened of her mother's disapproval. She decides she must discover who she is before society decides for her. For several weeks, Mary withdraws into books. She believes knowledge may give her the confidence and experience she lacks. She studies history, science, medicine, philosophy, and poetry, hoping education will help her build a meaningful life even if marriage never does. During this period, a letter arrives at Longbourn. Mrs. Bennet becomes convinced it must contain a proposal from Mr. Bingley. Instead, it comes from Mr. Collins, the male cousin who will inherit their estate. He announces that he intends to visit. The letter alarms the family because Collins represents their uncertain future. When Mr. Bennet dies, the property will belong to him, leaving Mrs. Bennet and her unmarried daughters dependent on others. Mrs. Bennet immediately decides that Collins should marry Elizabeth. If he becomes part of the family through marriage, perhaps they can remain at Longbourn. Elizabeth is horrified by the idea. Collins's pompous writing already makes him seem tedious and self-important. During the conversation, Mary is again compared to him because she is considered serious and boring. She remains silent, although the comparison stings. While the family waits for Collins to arrive, Charlotte advises Mary to consider him for herself. Charlotte views marriage as a practical arrangement. She tells Mary that a woman without beauty or money cannot afford to wait for perfect love. According to Charlotte, life offers 2 realistic paths: marriage or lonely dependence. Mary answers that she has decided to devote herself to learning, health, science, and useful work. Charlotte warns that intellectual interests will not protect her from poverty or isolation. Mr. Collins arrives and proves every bit as awkward as expected. He speaks endlessly, praises his wealthy patroness in nearly every conversation, and frequently insults people without realizing it. Mary takes Charlotte's warnings seriously and tries to engage him. She asks about books, religion, and his duties, but he barely notices her. His attention remains fixed on Elizabeth. Mrs. Bennet sees Mary attempting to impress him and orders her to stop embarrassing herself. Mary becomes angry because Elizabeth clearly has no interest in Collins, yet no one believes Mary should even try. Collins announces that another ball will take place that weekend and asks Elizabeth to reserve dances for him. He also expresses admiration for women who can perform music in public. Mary sees an opportunity. She practices the piano and singing for days, imagining that a successful performance might finally make Collins notice her and perhaps earn her mother's approval. At the ball, however, Mary's courage begins to fail. She watches Elizabeth perform confidently and fears that everyone will compare them. Charlotte reminds her that Collins will inherit the family estate and insists this may be Mary's only realistic chance. Driven by panic more than confidence, Mary sits at the piano and begins to sing. Her voice trembles. She becomes aware of every whisper, smile, and sideways glance in the room. The performance falls apart, and she flees before finishing. Hidden in a corner, she breaks down. Elizabeth finds her and tries to help. She says her own evening has also been painful, but Mary lashes out. In Mary's mind, Elizabeth cannot understand failure because beauty and confidence make life easier for her. She tells her sister that some people receive attention without trying while others work desperately and still remain invisible. Elizabeth does not argue. She apologizes for Mary's pain, even though she did not cause it. The next morning, the house erupts after Mr. Collins proposes to Elizabeth and she rejects him. Mrs. Bennet is furious. Mr. Bennet supports Elizabeth, and Collins prepares to leave. Suddenly, Mrs. Bennet decides Mary can replace her sister. She enters Mary's room with unusual sweetness and urges her to make herself available. Mary doubts Collins would consider her, but her mother pressures her to try, promising that rejection would change nothing. Before Mary can act, the family learns that Collins has proposed to Charlotte, who accepted immediately. The news devastates Mary. Charlotte had encouraged her to pursue him while quietly securing the proposal for herself. Mrs. Bennet responds by blaming Mary and insisting that no man will marry a woman who wears glasses and lacks charm. Over the following years, the Bennet daughters marry one by one. Jane finds happiness. Elizabeth builds a life of her own, and the younger sisters eventually leave as well. Mary remains at Longbourn with her parents, burying herself in study and household routine. Then Mr. Bennet dies unexpectedly. His death leaves Mary heartbroken and the family legally powerless. Only a week after the funeral, Mr. Collins arrives and gives them 2 weeks to leave the estate. The married sisters exchange worried looks because someone must take in their mother. Jane offers to welcome both Mrs. Bennet and Mary, but Mrs. Bennet refuses to have Mary accompany her. She reveals that her brother and sister-in-law, the Gardiners, have invited Mary to spend the summer in London and care for their children while the nanny is away. Mary is stunned. She assumed that grief might finally make her mother need her, but once again she is treated like an inconvenience that can be sent elsewhere. On the morning of her departure, Mary waits for Mrs. Bennet to say goodbye. Hill eventually explains that her mother feels unwell and will not come downstairs. Mary admits she is terrified the Gardiner children will dislike her. Hill tells her that leaving Longbourn may be the best thing that has ever happened to her. The world is larger than her mother's opinion, and Mary deserves the chance to discover it. When Mary reaches London, Aunt Gardiner welcomes her with a warmth that immediately feels unfamiliar. She does not inspect Mary's clothes, criticize her complexion, or compare her to her sisters. Instead, she embraces her, shows her a comfortable bedroom, and tells her to consider the house her own. The kindness nearly overwhelms Mary. For the first time, she experiences affection that is not tied to performance, beauty, or usefulness. The next morning, Mary meets her 3 young cousins, Anne, George, and Rebecca. Determined to prove she can be a responsible temporary governess, she begins with a serious history book. The children lose interest almost immediately, and George actually falls asleep. Mary changes strategies and attempts a lesson using a map of the world, but Rebecca escapes and hides. Mary feels embarrassed and wonders whether her mother was right about her being dull. At that moment, Tom Hayward enters. He is a close friend of the Gardiners and clearly knows the children well. The room changes as soon as he arrives. He jokes with George, turns the geography lesson into a game, and playfully convinces Rebecca to emerge from a wooden chest. Tom also teases Mary without making her feel small. Instead of judging her seriousness, he treats it as part of her charm. She unexpectedly laughs, and that moment becomes the first sign that London may allow a different version of Mary to appear. After lunch, Tom and the children spend the afternoon playing outside. Mary sits nearby, watching rather than joining. She has spent so many years believing she is incapable of play that she does not know how to begin. Tom invites her more than once, but she politely refuses. He does not push her. His patience makes her feel safe. That night, Aunt Gardiner explains that the family will host several dinners and attend social gatherings during the summer. She tells Mary she never has to perform or pretend, but offers to help her choose a few new dresses if that would make her comfortable. Mary is surprisingly excited. The next day, they visit a fabric shop where rows of colors and patterns leave Mary frozen. She hears her mother's voice in her mind. insisting that certain shades make her skin look worse and that nothing truly flatters her. Aunt Gardner gently reminds her that Mrs. Bennet is not present. Mary should choose a color because she enjoys it, not because someone else approves. After hesitating, Mary selects a fabric she genuinely loves. Later, while alone with the children, Mary attempts one of their games. She is awkward at first, but slowly becomes absorbed in it. Tom arrives unexpectedly and is delighted to see her participating. He joins them, turning the game into a ridiculous adventure that leaves everyone laughing. Mary feels a new kind of happiness, one based not on being admired, but on being present. Tom also notices her love of reading. Instead of mocking her serious interests, he recommends poetry and asks what she thinks about the books she finishes. Mary begins to look forward to their conversations. He listens closely, challenges her opinions, and seems genuinely interested in the way her mind works. Without realizing it, she starts developing feelings for him. At the first large dinner hosted by the Gardners, Mary is anxious. Formal gatherings have always reminded her of being ignored beside her sisters. Aunt Gardner assures her that she can leave the room whenever she feels overwhelmed. Early in the evening, Mary meets Baxter, a confident and friendly young woman who immediately includes her in conversation. Mary relaxes and begins to enjoy herself. Then she learns that Baxter is Tom's romantic partner. The two have an understanding that they will marry once Tom's finances are secure. Mary hides her disappointment. She tells herself that Tom's friendship is enough and decides to use the summer to discover her own interests rather than chase another unavailable man. Still, the news hurts because she had begun to imagine that his attention meant something more. When Mary returns from the party, she overhears Uncle Gardner discussing her with his wife. He says Mrs. Bennet's constant criticism has damaged Mary's confidence so deeply that she expects rejection before anyone has the chance to accept her. Aunt Gardner agrees but says Mary is changing. Hearing them analyze her pain makes Mary feel exposed. She slips outside before they notice her. Tom happens to be near the house and asks what she thought of the poetry book he recommended. Mary, desperate to control her feelings, becomes distant. She answers briefly and returns indoors. There, she discovers a letter from her mother ordering her home. Mrs. Bennet claims the family dog is unwell and needs Mary's attention. The request confirms that her mother does not miss her as a daughter. She misses having someone available for unpleasant tasks. Even so, Mary sees the letter as an escape from the emotional changes London has created. Aunt Gardner later tells her that Tom has invited the family to visit his home for a morning of poetry. Mary suspects the gathering is arranged partly for her because she once pretended not to care for poems. When they arrive, Tom welcomes everyone in the courtyard and reads one of his favorite pieces. Mary is deeply moved. The language describes longing, freedom, and the courage to live honestly. By the end, she has tears in her eyes. Aunt and Uncle Gardner deliberately walk away, leaving Mary and Tom together. Mary becomes increasingly nervous. The more comfortable she feels around him, the more dangerous her emotions seem. To protect herself, she announces that she will return to Longbourn because her mother needs her. She adds that Tom will not notice her absence because he has work and Baxter to occupy his time. Tom looks genuinely disappointed, but he cannot challenge her assumption without betraying his current relationship. Mary tells the Gardners she plans to leave at the end of the week. They respond by arranging a farewell party. She begins writing a letter accepting her mother's demand. Aunt Gardner recognizes that Mary is running away and tries to help through a story. She describes finding a beautiful blue hat that was already reserved for someone else. At another shop, she discovered several hats she liked just as much and ultimately chose the one that felt most like herself. Mary initially takes the story literally. Aunt Gardner finally explains that remaining in London will give her opportunities to meet new people and find a life that truly suits her. One disappointment does not mean every possibility has disappeared. The advice makes Mary hesitate. She leaves the letter unfinished. On the evening of the farewell party, she wears the dress she designed with Aunt Gardner, choosing every detail for herself. The result does not transform her into one of her sisters. Instead, it allows her to look comfortable in her own body, which changes the way she carries herself. At the party, Mary meets William Ryder, an adventurous young man with money, confidence, and endless curiosity. He is immediately intrigued by her because she does not flatter him. While the guests play a word and strategy game, Mary becomes animated and competitive. She laughs openly, argues her answers, and forgets to monitor how she appears. Tom watches her and is pleased to see her finally behaving naturally. Before he can tell her, Ryder steps between them and enthusiastically continues the conversation. By the end of the night, Mary decides not to return home. She tells Aunt Gardner she wants to stay in London for the summer. Her aunt is delighted because she understands that distance from Mrs. Bennet is allowing Mary to heal. Mary writes a new letter explaining that she has received invitations to several events and will remain with the Gardners. Soon afterward, Mary takes a walk with Baxter, who mentions that the children's nanny has returned. She suggests Mary can now focus on meeting possible husbands. The subject makes Mary uncomfortable. She tells Baxter about a woman who believed marriage was the only alternative to misery. Baxter is astonished. She points out that many marriages are miserable and that Mary has time to learn what she wants. A husband should add to a meaningful life, not become the only reason for having one. Baxter decides to help Mary prepare for the next ball. Their makeover is not about hiding Mary's face. Baxter teaches her posture, breathing, conversation, and the importance of making eye contact. Most importantly, she tells Mary not to imitate anyone else. Confidence will only last if it grows from honesty. At the ball, Baxter encourages Tom to dance with Mary. Mary accepts because refusing would appear rude, but she is tense throughout the dance, aware that Baxter is watching and determined not to reveal her feelings. As soon as it ends, Ryder appears, delighted to see Mary again. He talks with her about travel, books, politics, and scientific discoveries. Ryder is fascinated because Mary's opinions frequently challenge his own. He asks her to dance. At first, Mary concentrates so intensely on each step that she looks uncomfortable. Ryder begins asking questions about subjects she loves. As she talks, her body relaxes. She smiles, forgets the room, and begins enjoying the dance. Other guests notice her, including Tom, who watches with unexpected jealousy. The evening is interrupted by Caroline Bingley. Caroline is elegant, wealthy, and accustomed to controlling attention. She recognizes Mary as the sister of her brother's wife and uses the connection to embarrass her. In front of Ryder, Caroline suggests Mary came to London as a servant or perhaps to hunt for a husband. Ryder quickly changes the subject and invites Mary to a dinner party at his home. Caroline is furious that her insult failed to drive him away. The next morning, Aunt Gardner notices Mary's mood and explains that Caroline's cruelty likely came from insecurity. Mary cannot understand why someone as beautiful and confident as Caroline would feel threatened by her. Aunt Gardner explains that public confidence can hide deep fear. Some people preserve their status by making others feel smaller. Mary cannot control Caroline's behavior, but she can set boundaries and refuse to accept her judgment as truth. At Ryder's dinner, he tells Mary that their conversations have renewed his interest in reading. Caroline arrives and immediately inserts herself between them. At the table, she rushes to sit beside Ryder, leaving Mary next to a quiet gentleman who seems interested only in food. Mary attempts to discuss books, but he shows no interest. Instead of giving up completely, she asks about his favorite subject. He begins speaking passionately about horses and racing. Soon he is animated and friendly. Tom and Ryder both notice that Mary has a rare ability to draw people out when she stops worrying about impressing them. Caroline notices too. Her jealousy grows. She corners Mary and tells her she has none of her sister's beauty, intelligence, or personality. She warns that Ryder will eventually reject her and that Mary is too fragile to survive another humiliation. For the first time, Mary refuses to remain silent. She replies that Caroline sounds remarkably experienced in rejection, considering how eagerly she distributes advice about it. Caroline is stunned and leaves in anger. Tom approaches Mary afterward and warns her to be careful with Ryder. He calls Ryder reckless and suggests his attention may not be serious. Mary becomes irritated because she and Ryder are only friends, and Tom has no right to monitor her choices while planning a future with Baxter. Caroline then attempts revenge by asking Mary to sing in front of everyone. The request instantly brings back memories of the disastrous performance at the earlier ball. Mary freezes. Before she can respond, Uncle Gardner arrives with alarming news. Mrs. Bennet has sent a letter claiming she is gravely ill. Mary panics, accidentally strikes a table, and shatters a valuable vase that belonged to Ryder's father. Humiliated and terrified for her mother, she leaves without properly explaining. During the journey home, Mary believes she cannot survive losing her mother, despite all the pain between them. When she arrives, she finds her sisters relaxed and Mrs. Bennet perfectly healthy. Her mother barely greets her and immediately criticizes her skin, saying London has made her look worse. Mary realizes the emergency was invented to bring her back. Within a day, Mrs. Bennet assigns Mary responsibility for the family dog and resumes treating her as unpaid help. A week passes. No one notices Mary's unhappiness except Elizabeth. Mary tells her about the disaster at Ryder's party and says everyone in London must think she is ridiculous. Elizabeth reassures her that embarrassing moments fade and that other people rarely remember our mistakes as long as we do. Their conversation is interrupted when a servant announces a visitor. Mary enters the guest room and finds William Ryder. She assumed he would be furious about the vase, but he has traveled all the way from London because he was worried about her sudden departure. Mrs. Bennet and the sisters are impressed by his wealth, appearance, and obvious admiration for Mary. Mrs. Bennet immediately invites him to stay. The following day, Ryder tells Mary about his childhood. His father was an entomologist who spent most of his time studying insects. Ryder loved him but rarely saw him before his death when Ryder was 15. The regret shaped his philosophy. He intends to spend life chasing experiences rather than allowing duty to trap him. He invites Mary horseback riding. Although she has little interest in horses, she agrees because she enjoys his company. Mrs. Bennet corners Mary afterward and insists Ryder is preparing to propose. She orders her to accept because no better opportunity will ever appear. Mary walks away rather than argue. Ryder soon asks to speak privately. He tells Mary that meeting her changed the way he sees the world and that he wants more time with her. He proposes that she travel to Italy with him so they can explore, learn, and live together. Mary initially feels excited until he adds that marriage is a suffocating institution and he assumes she shares his rejection of it. Mary realizes he is not offering marriage at all. He wants companionship without commitment, a choice that could destroy her reputation and leave her unprotected. Ryder sees that he has shocked her and gives her until the next morning to decide. Elizabeth later asks whether he proposed. When she learns the truth, she angrily claims Ryder wants Mary as temporary entertainment until he becomes bored. Mary defends him, accusing Elizabeth of caring more about scandal than her happiness. Elizabeth asks one final question. Does Mary truly love him enough to sacrifice everything? Then she leaves Mary alone. By morning, Mary understands her answer. She tells Ryder that she cannot accept. She respects him and admires his freedom, but she will not build her life on an arrangement that violates her values. She believes he will eventually meet someone who genuinely wants the same future. Ryder is heartbroken but does not pressure her. He leaves with dignity. Mrs. Bennet reacts with fury. She orders Mary to write a letter begging him to return and accept his proposal. If Mary refuses, she will never be allowed back to London and will spend the rest of her life serving her mother. Mary chooses refusal. Remaining trapped at home feels less destructive than giving herself to a man she does not love. Elizabeth becomes increasingly angry at the way Mrs. Bennet treats Mary. She secretly writes to Uncle Gardner and asks him to intervene. The Gardners soon arrive and invite Mary on a journey through the Lake District. Mrs. Bennet claims Mary is forbidden from enjoying herself because she disobeyed. This time Mary reaches her limit. She calmly says she would be delighted to travel with her aunt and uncle. Before Mary leaves, Elizabeth apologizes for every moment she made Mary feel embarrassing or inferior. She says she has always been proud to be her sister. Mary embraces her. Those words heal a wound she has carried for years. Inside the carriage, Aunt Gardner casually reveals that Tom will meet them during the trip. Mary wonders whether her life will ever become simple again. At a rest stop, she unexpectedly sees Baxter. Baxter happily explains that she and Tom ended their relationship because her feelings had changed. She is already engaged to another man she met at a recent gathering. Mary is relieved, but immediately worries that Tom may be devastated. When Mary finally meets Tom in the Lake District, both behave awkwardly. She is afraid to mention Baxter. He is afraid to ask about Ryder, worried that Mary may be engaged. As the group travels, they spend time fishing, walking through forests and discussing books. Tom appears relaxed and happy. Aunt Gardner later points out that he does not behave like a broken-hearted man. More importantly, he is unusually comfortable around Mary. A week later, Tom takes Mary onto a lake in a small boat. Away from the others, he begins explaining that his feelings for Baxter changed long before their separation. He seems ready to say more, but Ryder suddenly appears on the shore, shouting with excitement. He swims out to the boat and accidentally ruins the moment. When Tom tries to pull him aboard, Ryder drags Tom into the water. Both men are forced to swim back. Ryder is not alone. Caroline has joined his trip, and she looks displeased to see Mary. At dinner, Tom tells Mary he has arranged a mountain climb for the following morning. Ryder immediately invites himself and Caroline, insisting group travel is safer and more entertaining. Mary pretends to welcome the idea. By morning, Mary knows clearly that her feelings belong to Tom, not Ryder. She begins the climb with nervous excitement. Halfway up, Aunt and Uncle Gardner grow tired and return to the hotel. Mary continues with Tom, Ryder, Caroline, and a guide. At the summit, Tom finally begins his confession. He tells Mary that she is the only person around whom he feels completely himself. He is about to explain what she means to him when Ryder interrupts and demands a private conversation about urgent business. Afterward, Mary approaches Tom, expecting him to continue. Instead, his manner changes completely. He says his circumstances are different now and that there can be no future between them. Mary is crushed and confused. Nothing makes sense because his feelings seemed obvious only minutes earlier. The guide warns that a violent storm is approaching and orders everyone down the mountain. Ryder is excited by the danger and talks about the thrill of witnessing floods from above. Tom tells him this is not an adventure. People may die. Hurt and angry, Mary refuses to descend simply because Tom tells her to. Tom cannot leave because he promised the Gardners he would protect her. The storm arrives with terrifying speed. Wind, rain, and falling rocks turn the trail into chaos. Ryder, who had celebrated the danger, becomes the first to run for safety. Caroline slips, and her leg becomes trapped beneath a rock. Despite Caroline's previous cruelty, Mary stays. She and Tom free the injured leg and support Caroline down the mountain. By the time they reach the hotel, Mary collapses from exhaustion. Her health deteriorates, and she remains unconscious for days. Tom sits outside her room, waiting for news. Once Mary wakes and the doctor says she will recover, Tom leaves without saying goodbye. Back in London, Mary learns that no one knows where he went. Instead of chasing him, she decides to focus on herself. She begins considering work with children and imagines building an independent life. Her progress is interrupted when Mrs. Bennet arrives and announces she will personally find Mary a husband. A miserable series of blind meetings follows, each one confirming that marriage without connection would be another form of imprisonment. Ryder eventually visits and apologizes for his behavior on the mountain. He admits that recklessness is not courage and that chasing danger nearly got people killed. Then he proposes properly, offering marriage rather than an informal arrangement. Mary appreciates his growth but tells him the truth. She does not love him. Accepting would make both of them unhappy. Ryder finally understands and leaves peacefully. Mrs. Bennet rushes in hoping to stop him, but Mary tells her the interference must end. She walks outside to clear her head and unexpectedly meets Mr. Sparrow, now a qualified physician. He is married and has a baby daughter. Mary is sincerely happy for him. Sparrow asks why she continues sacrificing her happiness to win approval from a mother whose values are completely different. He encourages her to live according to her own conscience. His words give Mary the final push she needs. She returns home and tells Mrs. Bennet that she will not marry Ryder or anyone else until she chooses freely. She understands that her mother equates marriage with happiness, but Mary has found meaning in a different life. Mrs. Bennet refuses to accept this and angrily returns home. The next day, Caroline visits to thank Mary for saving her on the mountain. Mary reassures her that Ryder is only a friend and admits her heart belongs to Tom, even if they can never be together. Caroline is relieved and leaves with a new respect for her. Weeks pass. Mary begins working as a nanny and discovers she is naturally gifted with children when she allows herself to be playful. She stops shaping every decision around gossip. The Gardners become the loving family she always needed. One afternoon, Mary walks through the square and suddenly sees Tom. She demands to know where he has been. Tom apologizes and explains what Ryder told him on the mountain. Ryder said he intended to propose and could offer Mary greater financial security. Tom believed stepping aside would protect her future. Mary becomes furious. She tells him he had no right to decide what would make her happy. Wealth is not the life she wants. She loves him and knows that being with him feels like home. Tom finally confesses that he loves her too. He returned because Caroline wrote to him, explaining that Mary had rejected Ryder and loved Tom. Soon afterward, Mary and Tom marry. Their home is filled with books, children, laughter, and the small details they chose together. Mary does not become a copy of her sisters or the woman her mother tried to create. She builds a life based on affection, curiosity, useful work, and self-respect. The journey matters because Mary's final happiness does not begin when a man chooses her. It begins when she chooses herself. Tom can love her fully only after she stops believing that love must be earned through obedience. The series ends with Mary finally free from the standards that once controlled her, surrounded by people who value her mind, her kindness, and the person she has always been beneath the fear. What makes Mary's journey especially compelling is that nearly every important relationship reflects a different possible future. Mrs. Bennet represents a life ruled by fear. Charlotte represents survival through compromise. Ryder represents freedom without responsibility. Caroline represents confidence built on competition. Tom represents companionship, but even he must learn not to make decisions on Mary's behalf. Aunt Gardner represents unconditional guidance, while Elizabeth represents family love that becomes stronger when both sisters finally speak honestly. Mary must listen to all of them before learning that none of their answers can replace her own judgment. Mrs. Bennet's behavior is cruel, but the story also reveals the anxiety beneath it. She lives in a society where women can lose their security overnight, and after Mr. Bennet's death, that fear becomes reality. Her mistake is not understanding the danger. It is believing that fear justifies humiliating her children. She treats beauty like financial protection and marriage like a rescue plan. Jane and Elizabeth survive the pressure partly because their personalities allow them to resist or redirect it. Mary absorbs every criticism. Since she is quiet, her mother assumes the words do not hurt. In reality, the silence means Mary has nowhere safe to place the pain. The glasses become a powerful symbol. Mary needs them to see the world clearly, yet her mother treats them as proof that she is becoming less desirable. Sparrow sees the opposite. He recognizes that the glasses help Mary engage with the books and ideas she loves. When he compliments her, he is not merely praising her appearance. He is accepting a visible part of who she is. Mary's rejection of him at the ball shows how deeply her mother's values have infected her. She knows class prejudice is unfair because she suffers from similar judgment, but fear pushes her to repeat it. That mistake remains with her, making their later reunion meaningful. Sparrow has built a satisfying life without waiting for her approval, and his final advice proves he still understands her. The early performance at the ball is another turning point. Mary believes success on the piano will force society to acknowledge her. She practices not because music gives her joy, but because she wants Collins and her mother to see her as useful. The failure is painful because it exposes the weakness of that plan. Performing for approval makes every glance feel like a verdict. Years later in London, Mary becomes magnetic during games, conversations, and dancing only when she stops monitoring herself. The contrast shows that confidence is not a costume Aunt Gardner can purchase for her. It appears when Mary becomes interested in the moment rather than obsessed with the audience. Charlotte's marriage to Collins also teaches Mary an uncomfortable lesson. Charlotte is not a villain. She understands her limited options and chooses security over romance. Her decision is rational within their society, but it is not the future Mary wants. At first, Mary thinks Charlotte stole her chance. Eventually, she realizes Collins never saw her clearly, and winning his proposal would not have solved her loneliness. The episode forces Mary to separate the desire to be chosen from the desire to be loved. Those are not the same thing. London changes Mary because the Gardners create an environment where mistakes are allowed. At Longbourn, every error confirms her mother's belief that she is hopeless. At the Gardner home, a boring lesson, an awkward conversation, or a social mistake becomes something she can learn from. The children do not require her to be beautiful or polished. They only need attention, imagination, and patience. When Mary discovers she can make them laugh, she begins to understand that her seriousness is not a permanent prison. It is simply one part of her personality. Aunt Gardner never demands instant transformation. She offers choices. She asks whether Mary wants new dresses instead of telling her what to wear. She explains Caroline's insecurity without ordering Mary to hate her. She uses stories and questions because she wants Mary to practice making decisions. Even when Mary misunderstands the hat story, Aunt Gardner patiently explains it. This is the opposite of Mrs. Bennet's parenting. One woman uses shame to force obedience. The other provides enough safety for independence to grow. Tom is important because he is the first man who enjoys Mary's mind before considering her as a romantic possibility. He recommends poetry, listens to her interpretations, and recognizes when she is pretending not to care. His playfulness gives her permission to relax. However, Tom is not perfect. He remains attached to Baxter while his feelings are changing, and later he steps aside because Ryder can offer greater wealth. In doing so, he repeats the same mistake everyone else makes. He assumes Mary needs someone to choose her future. Their eventual relationship can only succeed after she confronts him and insists that love does not grant control. Baxter could easily have become a rival, but the story gives her more depth. She befriends Mary sincerely, helps her gain confidence, and eventually admits that her relationship with Tom is no longer right. She does not cling to him simply because they had an agreement. Her ability to change direction becomes another example for Mary. A promise made before understanding oneself does not have to become a lifelong sentence. Baxter's later engagement proves that ending one relationship can create space for a better match. Ryder enters Mary's life at the exact moment she is discovering how exciting freedom can feel. He is spontaneous, curious, and fascinated by her unusual perspective. Unlike society's polished gentleman, he talks openly about travel, science, and experience. His attention helps Mary see that she can be interesting without imitating her sisters. Yet Ryder's philosophy has a serious weakness. He believes avoiding commitment automatically creates freedom. Because he regrets losing time with his father, he chases every experience before it disappears. That urgency makes him charming, but it also makes him careless. His first proposal is appealing because it seems to offer everything Mary has been denied: adventure, education, independence, and affection. The danger appears when he assumes she must reject marriage simply because she rejects her mother's obsession with it. Mary does not hate commitment. She hates being forced into the wrong commitment. Her refusal is one of her earliest truly independent decisions. She turns down both her mother's expectations and Ryder's expectations, choosing a value system of her own. Ryder's behavior on the mountain reveals the difference between romantic recklessness and real courage. He celebrates the storm while danger remains imaginary. Once the weather becomes violent, he runs. Mary, who has always considered herself weak, remains beside Caroline and helps save her. This is the moment when Mary's internal growth becomes physical action. She no longer freezes under pressure or waits for approval. She sees someone in danger and acts according to her conscience. Caroline's development mirrors Mary's in a different way. At first, Caroline protects her social position through cruelty. She attacks Mary because Ryder's interest makes her feel replaceable. Her beauty and confidence do not protect her from insecurity. They become tools she uses to hide it. Mary finally defeats that behavior, not by becoming prettier or more powerful, but by refusing to accept Caroline's definition of her. The sharp response at dinner is satisfying because it marks the first time Mary publicly defends herself. The mountain rescue changes Caroline because Mary helps her despite having every reason to walk away. That kindness forces Caroline to confront the difference between them. Caroline had treated relationships as competitions, while Mary refuses to let jealousy decide whether another person deserves safety. Her later letter to Tom is an act of gratitude and repair. She cannot undo her previous behavior, but she can stop fear from ruining Mary's happiness. Elizabeth's relationship with Mary is equally important. Mary spends years assuming Elizabeth's beauty and intelligence make life effortless. Elizabeth, meanwhile, does not fully understand how deeply Mary has been injured. Their arguments expose resentment that polite family conversation has hidden. After Mr. Bennet's death, Elizabeth becomes more protective. Her question about Ryder is harsh but necessary. Does Mary love him? Or does she love finally being wanted? Later, Elizabeth arranges Mary's escape from Mrs. Bennet and tells her she is proud. The apology does not erase childhood pain, but it gives Mary something she has needed from a sister: recognition. Mr. Bennet's absence also shapes the story. He occasionally protects his daughters from his wife's most extreme demands, but humor and withdrawal often replace real intervention. Mary remembers being included in the list for the first ball, yet she also remembers how frequently he retreated into his study while Mrs. Bennet criticized her. His death is emotionally devastating, but it also exposes how fragile the family's security always was. Mary cannot remain hidden at Longbourn because Longbourn itself is no longer theirs. The move to London, therefore, becomes both exile and liberation. Mary believes she is being sent away because no one needs her. In practical terms, that is partly true. Her mother treats her as a convenient caretaker. But the rejection accidentally places Mary among people capable of loving her. The Gardiners do not rescue her through wealth or marriage. They give her room, work, friendship, and time. Those ordinary forms of support transform her more deeply than any glamorous proposal. The series also challenges the idea that romance must be the only successful ending for a woman. Before Tom returns, Mary has already created a meaningful life. She works with children, earns respect, and belongs in the Gardiner household. She rejects Ryder's second proposal, even though it is respectable and financially attractive. By then, she knows loneliness is preferable to a marriage built on gratitude or pressure. Tom's arrival adds happiness to her life, but it does not create her value. This is why the final confrontation with Mrs. Bennet matters more than any proposal. Mary does not demand that her mother understand every choice. She simply ends the right of anyone else to choose for her. She recognizes that Mrs. Bennet may never approve. Earlier, that possibility would have terrified her. Now she accepts it. Freedom arrives when she stops treating approval as a requirement. Tom's return completes the romance only after both characters admit their mistakes. He explains that he believed stepping aside was noble because Ryder had more money. Mary refuses to praise the sacrifice. She tells him that deciding for her was another form of disrespect, even if motivated by love. Tom listens. Their confession succeeds because Mary is no longer the frightened girl who would reject Sparrow to obey her mother, or consider Collins merely to avoid loneliness. Their marriage is therefore built on conversation rather than rescue. Mary can fill the home with books and continue working with children. Tom can share poetry, humor, and curiosity without asking her to become more fashionable or less serious. They create a household where affection is expressed openly and mistakes do not become permanent labels. By the final scene, the qualities once used against Mary have become strengths. Her seriousness makes her dependable. Her love of books gives her imagination and empathy. Her caution protects her from Ryder's first offer. Her loyalty saves Caroline. Her sensitivity helps her understand children. Even the insecurity she spent years hiding gives her compassion for people who feel overlooked. The story's message is not that every quiet woman will eventually be rewarded with romance. It is that a person cannot build happiness while living entirely through someone else's judgment. Mary spends years trying to become acceptable to her mother, then briefly risks becoming adventurous enough for Ryder and socially interesting enough for London. Her peace begins only when she stops performing. For viewers, Mary's experiences feel familiar even outside the historical setting. Families still compare siblings. Beauty standards still shape confidence. People still mistake popularity for value and marriage for proof of success. The costumes and inheritance laws belong to another era, but the emotional struggle remains modern. Mary wants what most people want, to be seen accurately, loved without conditions, and trusted to make her own decisions. The ending earns its warmth because happiness does not erase the difficult years. Mary remembers Sparrow, Collins, the failed song, her father's death, Ryder's offer, the storm, and Tom's disappearance. Those experiences become part of her growth rather than evidence that she is cursed. She finally understands that embarrassment is survivable, rejection is not a verdict, and being different from her sisters does not make her less worthy. Mary's greatest victory is not winning Tom over Caroline, Baxter, or anyone else. It is becoming capable of accepting Tom's love without treating it as proof that her mother was wrong. She already knows her mother was wrong. She accepts him because the relationship reflects the life she deliberately chose. And with that, Mary's long search for belonging comes to an end. The girl once ordered to stand beside the wall and fetch refreshments now creates a home filled with conversation, learning, play, and genuine affection. She no longer waits for society to assign her a role. She writes the role herself, and that choice becomes the most romantic part of the entire story. There is also a quiet irony in the way society first evaluates Mary. The people around her assume she lacks charm because she does not perform femininity in the expected way. She does not flirt easily, speak lightly, or pretend ignorance to make a man comfortable. Yet once she enters an environment where curiosity is welcomed, those same traits make her memorable. Ryder enjoys being challenged. Tom values her honesty. The children trust her seriousness because it is paired with patience. Even the silent dinner guest opens up once Mary asks about the subject he genuinely loves. She was never empty or uninteresting. She was simply surrounded by people who expected her to entertain them before they made any effort to understand her. Her physical appearance follows the same pattern. Nothing magical happens to turn Mary into a different woman. New clothing helps because she chooses it herself, not because the fabric changes her face. The confidence Baxter teaches her is not a collection of tricks designed to fool men. It is permission to occupy space without apologizing. By the time she dances with Ryder, the room notices her because she is engaged, expressive, and alive. The transformation is emotional before it is visual. The conclusion also leaves room for forgiveness without demanding reconciliation on unfair terms. Mary understands that Mrs. Bennet's fear came from real financial insecurity, but understanding does not require surrender. She can love her mother while refusing to become her servant. She can appreciate Elizabeth's apology without pretending their childhood was painless. She can forgive Caroline after the rescue while still remembering the boundaries she learned to set. Growth allows Mary to be compassionate without returning to silence. Tom, too, must accept that good intentions do not excuse controlling behavior. When he leaves after the storm and later explains his reasoning, he expects Mary may see his sacrifice as honorable. Instead, she tells him plainly that he took away her choice. His willingness to hear that criticism is one reason their future feels believable. He does not argue that he knows better. He apologizes, confesses the truth, and lets Mary decide. In the end, the love story succeeds because it stops being about rescue. Tom does not save Mary from an empty life. She has already begun building one. Mary does not rescue Tom from Baxter or financial uncertainty. He must confront those issues himself. They meet again as two people who have learned that partnership requires honesty, freedom, and mutual respect. That is why the final marriage feels satisfying rather than predictable. Mary enters it without desperation. She is not racing against age, poverty, gossip, or her mother's disappointment. She chooses Tom because she knows herself well enough to recognize the life they can create together. Their happiness is not society's reward for becoming beautiful or obedient. It is the result of Mary refusing to abandon the person she was always meant to become. So the series closes on a hopeful note. Mary, once dismissed as the least promising Bennet sister, becomes the one who most deliberately designs her future. She finds meaningful work, a loving extended family, a partner who values her mind, and the courage to protect all of it. Her journey reminds us that being overlooked does not make someone ordinary, and a delayed beginning can still lead to an extraordinary life. Before the closing credits, the narrator reminds viewers that Mary's story is not about defeating every critic or proving that she deserved attention all along. It is about reaching a point where the criticism no longer controls her. Once that happens, compliments become pleasant rather than necessary. Rejection becomes painful rather than destructive, and love becomes a choice instead of a rescue. Mary can finally look in a mirror without hearing her mother's voice. She can wear glasses, discuss books, care for children, laugh loudly, make mistakes, and still believe she belongs in the room. That simple freedom is what she has been seeking. Tom's proposal gives the story its romantic conclusion, but Mary's confidence gives it meaning. She enters the next chapter, not as the forgotten Bennet sister, not as a disappointing daughter, and not as someone's compromise, but as a woman who knows her values and intends to live by them.